Hello and welcome to the Macon Atlanta podcast. I'm your host, Brent Macon, and we are talking with inspiring Atlantans about big questions, bold ideas, and better living. Our guest today is an old friend of mine, Bradford Church. He is the co-founder and chief product officer at Village Labs, an AI product that sifts through the entirety of your company's projects and communications and produces synthesized reports that save managers tons of administrative time. Bradford is a technologist. He formerly worked in product at Uber. He's a power user of these AI systems, both personally and professionally. And we covered how regular business people, regular you and me, how we can benefit from AI today, and what he's excited about and worried about when he looks to the future. And even in the weeks since we recorded this, the landscape is already shifting. And it's going to be important that we keep asking, what can AI do to help me right now? Thanks, Bradford, for the time. And as always, enjoy the episode. Bradford, thanks for joining today. Appreciate you sharing your time.
Thanks for having me, Brent.
Okay, so want to do three things today. We're going to talk practical uses of AI. We're going to talk the next frontier and kind of where this is going near term, and then kind of release the constraints. Let's talk about the psychological, spiritual implications of AI and where we're going, but definitely want this to be kind of a practical use guide for folks up front. So to start, I've seen you talk about your aha moment with AI. Can you tell us what that is and what that looked like?
Absolutely. So let me contextualize my aha moment or my oh shit moment as I talk about it in certain media. I don't know if we need to cut out my bad language here.
I think there's not too many young children listening yet,
okay,
so we're okay.
All right, market it as not for children on YouTube. So I don't get super excited by technology in of itself. Okay, so I actually was fortunate to use the really, really early versions of Chatgpt, like pre-Chatgpt 2. You may have as well. I know you've been following along since the early days of AI. But let me go back to my actual first aha moment, which was when I joined Uber. I know you spent a little bit of time at Uber, so maybe you had something similar. But when I joined Uber, I remember it was day one, and we looked at the Uber God view, which is what they called the global scale map view.
God view, that's what you're saying?
God view, yeah. Do you remember? I think it was called something different.
It was called heaven by the time I got there, a slight euphemism on God view.
I think later it was called city mapper or something like very mundane. But when I started, it was still God view. I won't even talk about the hell view, that was a different thing. But the God view had a map of a live position of every single smartphone that was using the Uber app in the entire world. So you could zoom out literally, to watch the entire globe of people moving around, both the drivers and the riders, making requests to each other, getting connected. And look, my aha moment there wasn't, oh wow, mobile phone applications are going to change the way that the world works. Just knowing that that existed wasn't the aha moment. Seeing it actually applied to the real world, fundamentally changing how people buy and sell stuff, that is ultimately the aha moment. It's like realizing that a technology exists isn't the exciting thing. It's that it's changing how people are living their lives or doing business. I would say the same thing about AI for me. For AI, I knew it was awesome. I played around with it all the time, but it didn't actually change anything in terms of how I did business or how I lived my life. The aha moment I had with Village Labs was we had just pivoted into being what we do today, which I can talk about in a little bit. And we had taken all of our company's data that we generate from our Slack, our Google Workspace, our CRM platform, our project management platform, all the stuff that lives in like 20 different applications, pulled it out, brought it into a vectorized database, made it available for different AI application systems, did all the hard work on data engineering and data pipeline management, and then finally served it on a silver platter to the AI. And then when I saw the outcome of what I was able to do, ask it questions about my company's data, get automated status reports about what my team was doing, have the AI tell me who was blocked on my team just by purely looking at the ambient data everybody was putting off, I was like, holy shit. This is actually going to change how everybody does their job.
What did it tell you? What did it tell you?
It told me the stuff that takes me hours every day tracking down as someone who manages a large team. So typically what I'm doing is like checking in like, hey, Brent, do you have any blockers today? Or can you please send me that document link that tells me what your like sales numbers were. And then I have to go and read through that stuff. And then I have to type up my own status update and send that to my boss or to my peers or whatever, right? None of that should exist as work that you have to do anymore. That is all fully automatable by large language models largely. And I think that, again, it's not the core technology that blew my mind. It was the fact that, oh my God, it actually works to change how people do business on a day-to-day basis. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And it's a different use case than let me type in a request and get a specific outcome based on something that I'm interfacing with one model, because it's going to do real work.
That's right. That's actually, I'm glad you brought that up. I think that most businesses out there that are using AI are either charlatans or they are point solutions. And let me explain what I mean by that. The charlatans out there are the equivalent of, shit coins, as they called them, in the crypto craze. They are just a wrapper around the Chatgpt API. And you've probably, I know I'm preaching to the choir here because you've used a million of these, I'm sure, but they are applications that have a simple UI, and all they're doing is taking advantage of OpenAI or an Anthropic model. Those are useless, and they're all going to go out of business eventually. They might make money now because they're taking advantage of people who don't understand.
Can you give an example of how someone might be using one of those right now?
Yeah. So if you ever go to I just talked to someone who I will not name, and I really respect this person, but on the side, he started a translation website business that essentially allows you to put very large volumes of text into the website, and he charges you a fee, and you get a really incredible translation output in any language of your choosing. All he's doing is going to the OpenAI API, sending that body of text with what he wants it to get translated into, and it returns, and he charges you triple whatever he's paying OpenAI to translate that.
So could you do the exact same thing on OpenAI for $20 a month, and you just don't need to use this at all?
Exactly, or free in a lot of cases. You don't even necessarily need the higher level models to get some really great translation. Or, insert other thing here, taking a CSV file and translating it into a markdown format. So I lost track of whatever you were originally talking about, but
Hold on.
Yeah.
Before we keep going.
Yeah.
What was hell mode on Uber? Because at least one person is listening being like, I really wish he had answered that. So this is for whoever you are out there.
I'm sorry I brought it up because I should not actually say what it was, I think, for a couple of reasons, but let's just say it involved a little bit of competitor tracking.
All right, we'll edit out. We'll edit out hell mode. This is a good effort. Sorry to create work. But I still wanted us to hold on. So that.
But look, I was just going to say that I think you asked about it's more than just a chat. I think it's worth just bringing up that, and I would actually love your 2 cents on this, Brent, as a power user of AI tools. I think we're moving away from chat and search-based AI. I think that anticipatory AI is where people are going to move. Why? People are lazy. I'm lazy. You're lazy. You don't want to be lazy, but our brains are tuned to not do extra work. Actually coming up with how you're going to prompt an AI model, coming up with even the idea that you need to search for something is work, right? And so if we can preempt that by knowing exactly who you are, I have a profile of Brent Macon. I know what you care about. I know who's on your team. I know the history of the work that you've done. There's nothing stopping me from knowing and predicting exactly what you need to know before you even realize you need to know it, and serving that to you on a silver platter. You can follow up with questions, right? But the actual act of typing something into a search bar or a chat bar, that's going to largely disappear as the primary use case for AI in the next 12 months. That's my hot prediction take.
Yeah, I appreciate you skipping the practical uses of AI and going to the future of AI topic. But no, I mean, great example. Like over and over, I tell AI, hey, I run a podcast. It's called Macon Atlanta. This is what we do. I just did an episode with this person, and I would like you to help me think through this and this, or this is what I wrote. Can you edit it for me? And I can easily see a world in which I've uploaded the finished video, and it's like, hey, really nice episode with Bradford, except when he wouldn't tell you about some of those things that you asked. And here are some of the main takeaways. You might want to edit out these parts. And it's like prompting it without me doing that work. It's like both hours back in the schedule and it's a higher order of thinking than just kind of regurgitating or improving on what I've already taken it.
Right.
And so that would be next level. And so I'm curious, like, have you been a power user since the beginning, and like what got you interested? And then how did you come to this professionally?
Oh, great question. So I'll preface this by, I'm not, which is probably obvious, I am not an AI academic expert. I don't know the details of how neural networks work. I've been fortunate enough to work with people from the MIT AI labs and the Stanford AI graduates, so some of the top folks in the field. So I, like you, probably know a lot of the words, and I can talk the talk, but I can't walk the walk on that. But I will say where I live is in the applied artificial intelligence to business world. And I think that that is its own really important space going forward. And so I completely forgot your original question.
Well, just how you got here professionally. And I think being, applied to business, that's 99, probably 100% of the people listening to this.
Yeah.
How do you make me better at work?
Right.
How do you make me the person that I want to be? How do you make me more efficient so that I can either do more or have more time with my kids and family, right? Like, that's what people want to know.
Okay. And so how I got into it is, look, when you're in technology, and when you're like rubbing shoulders with a lot of these folks, and also 3 of my ex-bosses are now running teams at OpenAI. So I just was kind of forced, whether I wanted to or not, to engage with these AI tools. And I have to say, I was pretty unimpressed. So I actually think we ran into each other in switch yards a couple times, so where you had already gotten deep into them and you were telling me about this. And I had already decided, hey, I tried some of the earlier versions, not impressed. And then I went back and re-engaged in some of those tools. And I realized that the most effective way to use them at the time, and this is changing, was for very specific use cases where they had already been really heavily trained. It sounds like I'm saying something obvious, but if you haven't used these tools and you're watching, that's where to start. Really good example, web development software engineering. One of the easiest types of software to train AI models on. So all of our software developers, before we even became an AI native company, were using some of the tools out there to dramatically speed up their software development. I swear we have literally cut our team size in half just by using these tools. For better or worse, that means we're not paying 2 extra people at my company because we're using artificial intelligence. You asked about practical use cases, though. I do think there's plenty of things that you don't want to use them for. Stop me if I'm jumping ahead of the questions, but I think that there's 2 reasons why you wouldn't want to use AI. One is it doesn't do a good job. It's untrained in a specific niche area, or is likely to hallucinate, aka lie about what it's telling you. Or the second reason is why it's bad for you and your brain. So I'm kind of a radical fair warning about social media. I realize this is totally unrealistic, but ideally I think we should ban algorithms that optimize for eyeball time on apps. I think it's bad for human brains. My wife works at Meta. I spend time in big tech. I know that it's asymmetrical warfare that's being waged against your mind. And I think that AI in certain areas has the potential to do some of the same things, forcing us to take shortcuts on stuff that is actually beneficial to our brains long term to figure out ourselves. And that's up to you, right? That's a subjective thing.
Yeah. What's an example that you're thinking of when you think that?
So I think, for example, if I'm going to read certain types of document, not every document, but certain types of document that involve really detailed information required for decision making, I could feed a really large document that is data heavy into our Chatgpt or Anthropic instance and have it summarize it and give me suggested outcomes. I don't do that because it's going to force me to take shortcuts in my thinking. Sometimes reading through how someone writes, understanding the rhythm, the detail of the data they're sharing, actually forces you to, I think literally from a neuroscience perspective, forces you to get into the rhythm of how that person's thinking, who's the expert on something, so that you can fully appreciate their thought process before making an informed decision yourself. So that's probably the clearest example. The other ones would be like, sometimes you actually do need to learn how to write SQL, if you want to like really understand how to manipulate data, when you could just ask Chatgpt.
Yeah. Yeah. Where, and I appreciate you saying where you might not want to use it because you need to do the learning yourself. Like I like, Amazon's cultural way of writing memos out, because you can deliver a memo on something you thought through all the elements of it, compared to if you just give ChatGPT bullet points and have it flesh it out into a memo, you might not have thought around the corner on all of those issues.
Totally.
So putting aside the fact that you might be shortchanging your own development, and I'm not making light of that, I want to talk about where it does work well and where it doesn't work well for, let's call it, the average business professional. So again, still maybe it's not somebody who's like writing code,
sure,
but like what are some of the day-to-day uses? I imagine there's people out there who are like, if I read another article about AI, my head's going to explode or I'm going to fall asleep. But I haven't actually figured out how it can help me at work. Like, how should regular people be using this right now?
So, biased, but they should be using it through Village. And let me Village Labs. Let me use Village Labs as an example and realistically look. Like any startup, we're 2 decisions away from bankruptcy, right? We're also 2 decisions away from a huge fundraising round where we're all laughing to the bank, right? So I don't know which way it could go, but I do feel really strongly that the direction that we're headed is the answer to your question. So everyone should have a Perplexity, which is like Google with ChatGPT built in, or just a ChatGPT Pro subscription, in my opinion, to answer your question in the short term. You can use those tools to read and summarize boring ass memos that you don't want to actually read yourself. You can use those tools to transform things from different file types in a way that like blows my mind completely, right? Way better than anything on the internet. You can use it.
Give an example there?
So I can't tell you how many times I have copied and pasted something from a PDF document, like a really janky PDF document, copy paste, and asked it to put it into a CSV file for me and just be like, best guess column names, and like make it into something that I can paste into a spreadsheet, right? It saves incredible. I mean, I spent so much time as an analyst, 10 years ago doing that stuff. Deletes that entire work for me. So they're like little tasks. Like I would recommend that everyone who hasn't played with this, just try yourself. The next time you think I have a boring task ahead of me, just try and see what happens if you can copy and paste it into ChatGPT, and you're going to quickly learn what the limits of its capabilities are in terms of daily application. So it's not a direct answer, but it's an answer that I think everyone needs to figure out where the bounds are themselves, and then that's the fastest way to using it practically. But look, that's not I think the gaps in that are that it doesn't have memory of who you are or a broader contextual knowledge of what your organization's goals are. And so that's where companies, back to Village Labs, companies like us come in, where you can't just dump everything in your life into ChatGPT because it literally can't handle that. You need companies like Village or other folks who are dealing with real world applications of artificial intelligence to do all of the hard work that comes with data management, data sourcing, tagging, structure, that actually makes it so that it's suddenly a 10x versus like a 1.25x time saver. And we can go into more of what that looks like, but that's my answer for you.
Yeah, let's come back to Village, because I want to talk about what Village is building long term, and I want to keep this for now to kind of rank and file people who might be paying $20 a month and what can they do.
Don't try and sell Village Labs anymore, Bradford, on my podcast.
No, please do. Please do. Just stop jumping ahead. That's what.
I'm sorry.
Just kidding. I want to talk about how people are actually using AI as what I call like a prosthesis for thinking. And I heard that on a podcast. I did not come up with that.
I love it.
But it's, should AI in this moment be editing our work, or should we be editing its work, or should it be kind of replacing our work altogether? and like taking things fully off our plate? Like, where do you think it's in its superpower? Does that make sense?
It does. And I frankly would love to hear your opinion on this too. I think it's safe for me to ask you a question back. But I think that generally speaking, it should be editing our work. That might change. I have heard things about newer models coming out that are going to be a lot more capable at extrapolation and using access to the internet to be able to actually fill out real effect. Actually, just use your example for a second. You said, here are my 3 bullet points, write me a memo. Right now, that's typically filler, if it's fleshing it out, right? But if it suddenly has access to research, the internet with the right APIs and therefore access to actually real data it can use to flesh out to support your points, suddenly it's not filler. That's not the case in my experience right now. So I think for the most part, you should be using it as a cheat code to edit your existing work, whether it's, like I mentioned, in something as simple as file type changes or something more aggressive like checking everything for grammar mistakes, or something I use it for all the time is I literally copy and paste an Economist article into the top, and then I copy and paste whatever crap I wrote into the bottom, and I say, can you give me advice on how to make my writing look more like this incredible piece of writing? And it does such a good job.
Even if the subjects are not the same?
Correct.
Wow.
I mean, it's useful for me to find similar subjects. Like a hilarious tidbit on this is that one of the secret things that we have within Village's own AI prompting scenarios is for our daily update. The way we've tested like hundreds of different prompts. One of the ways that we made the daily briefings really effective is we literally included in the prompt an example from like 1960s CIA daily briefings that went to Kennedy, because it's just really incredible writing, and without like some touch point, the model's going to write like your average Joe on Reddit, right? Yeah. Not like a CIA analyst with incredible context on like what the president thinks is important.
Yeah, I feel like in everything about the AI moment, we tend to gloss over things that are just incredible. And it's like, here's a computer automatically giving you a company-specific generated brief that's of the quality that the president was handled 60 years ago. There you go. Good luck with your day. Like,
exactly. Totally.
That is nuts. Yeah. I mean, so when I think about my regular use, and this is, I think, the thing that I will always tell people about AI. It's like, it's risk-free to try to ask it to make anything you're doing better. And you might not get an answer that you like or you think is better, but you might. And so, I was coming up with a bonus structure for an employee the other day. Anything subjective is really where I will use this. And so I'm like, hey, this is what I think that I'm going to lead with. Can you give me 3 other ways to think about this? And it will suggest 3 others. And if I like one of those, great, I slot it in and it's elevated my thinking and up-leveled me. If I don't like it, no harm, no foul. It's not like that was a dumb idea, Brent, or like, there's just no downside to trying it. Agreed. And so I think that's the habit that I'm in right now, which is bumping up my best thinking and asking for other suggestions or other perspectives.
Yeah. And just to go back, totally agree. And as I said before, I think experimentation is the only way. If someone takes one thing away from this discussion, it's just try a bunch of stuff and you're going to quickly figure out where it adds value to your work. And just put a reminder on every 10 minutes, for like one day in your work day, and say, okay, I'm going to go check and see if I can like get some value out of AI. And like 70% of the time you're not, but the 30% is going to cut you down like ton of work. And again, tools like Perplexity that are actually tied to the internet. I promise I'm not paid by Perplexity, but I highly recommend trying those out.
Got it. What about like hacks people should be aware of with prompts? Like I remember I went to a training early on and someone said, if you tell the AI that this is a very important task and that it's, a good outcome on this would lead to good things to your family, or that your job depends on it, it's more likely to try hard and give you a better answer. Which, one, is crazy. That doesn't make any sense. And then 2, like, does that work? Like, are there other things like that?
It does work. The first version I heard of that myself was if you tell the AI that if it does a good job, you'll give it a $20 tip in cash. And it like measurably, I mean, like there are research papers on this that does a better job. The answer you're not going to like as a podcast host is that this is going to change.
Sure.
So whatever I say and whatever you say is going to be wrong or different in like 6 months. But right now, the way to think about that and the way that I have had a lot of success and my team has done like an absolute mind-numbing amount of prompt engineering, so I can say this with some, like, I guess, authority, is that the reason those things work is because these models are trained off of human beings and human labor. And so if on the internet or during the training process, anything came up to do with actually getting tipped, or your family being in a better place, right? Of which there are tons of examples that these models are actually trained off of. The results of how people reacted to those prompts were different. The original human results were different, right? So put your mind into that mindset, which is the machine is not some magical, set of bits and atoms sitting in a. I mean, it is sitting in a server farm somewhere, but it exists purely because of how humans have already reacted to it. So come up with stuff that, like tell it what it is. Tell it it's a CIA analyst, right? And it'll probably act more like whatever it thinks a CIA analyst is because it's based off of human interaction. So if you're looking for like actual hard tips, I don't have a ton of them other than like, tell it that you're holding its family ransom. Don't do that, actually. Tell it that it'll be better off in some way. And
one day the AI is going to show up on your doorstep and be like, I'm here for all those $20 Andrew Jackson tips that you promised me. And it's going to be a C-3PO by that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so the concept of prompt engineering that Bradford alluded to is basically just beyond the task, I edit this memo, what else can you put in that prompt to get the AI to do a better job of editing your memo? And so you can do things like give it a persona. You are an editor that has a keen eye for proofreading, who always has good suggestions, but is also so compassionate. So please don't tear apart my work. And by the way, this is a thing that I've been working super hard on, and my family's Christmas presents depend on it.
Right.
So please do that. And by the way, if you tell it that it's Christmas, it might not do as much work because AI might think it needs a winter break, which is wild.
Right.
If the AI thinks it's Saturday or Sunday, they might be less likely to give you a long answer for the same prompt compared to if it thinks it's Monday or Tuesday, because the AIs weirdly think that we take a weekend. And so there's just elements of how these things work that we seem to still be learning, which is kind of mind-blowing, kind of exciting and playful, and then a little scary at the same time.
Yeah, we don't know how these models truly work. It's almost impossible for us to map the connections that they're making. So it is a good bet to do either one of two things. What Brent just said, which is try and make it compassionate and empathetic towards your cause, or just Google it. That's the other key takeaway, because I guarantee you, and I've worked with some of them, there are some software engineers out there that spend their entire weekend testing different AI prompts. So don't suffer through it yourself. Just Google it. Someone probably already thought of how to do it better than you. That's my 2 cents.
Let's talk about which models to actually use. So you've mentioned Perplexity. We've talked OpenAI. You've talked about Anthropic, which is another one of the well-founded startups in the space. What's the difference between those? How do you decide which one to use? Should people be paying money for one? Should they be paying money for multiple, and why? Like, how should folks navigate that?
Your average person should not pay money for more than one, because thanks to the magic of competition and capitalism, their best models are all more or less equivalent. And so choose something that works for you. It could be, OpenAI subscription to use for O. It could be a Claude subscription to use Sonnet 3.5. You could use some of the Llama models that are the open source ones made by Meta. It really doesn't matter too much, but if you are doing it for business purposes and you have a real critical business need that you're using these models for, highly recommend doing a very serious evaluation for your specific business need. The way that we did this was I think we had 6 or 7 different models that we looked at across Google models, Meta models, OpenAI models, Anthropic models, and probably another one as well. And we look at input costs and output costs. You then do like 100 different input output comparisons across all of them. Ideally, you get someone who's not paid by your company to do an evaluation of the outputs, and then you just do a scientific final decision on how to use the models. For example, at least as of time of this recording, Chatgpt is a little bit better when it comes to doing certain types of math problems than the Claude Anthropic models. But the Claude Anthropic models, in my opinion, write significantly more like a human when it comes to writing. So that's an example. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was what you just said, ChatGPT better at math, Claude Anthropic better at writing. I'm curious, again, if you're a layperson not making a procurement decision for a company, like how do you evaluate? Like if I'm thinking about what Mexican restaurant do I want for lunch, like I know Chipotle doesn't do free chips and salsa, but maybe like Willie's does. And so I can know that. But like, how are they even supposed to know the difference between Claude and ChatGPT? Like it feels very obscure from a consumer perspective.
Yeah. And again, I know this is not exactly what you're looking for in terms of an answer, but I think that's okay. And I think that people can get wrapped up in the difference between Chipotle and Willie's, when in reality, like whatever's closer actually really is what you probably want, or whatever has the deal on a 50% off burritos that day.
Yeah.
And so the average person shouldn't stress too much about it. But if you're a hobbyist and you want to try it out, or it's a serious business reason, then like do your research, because it really does matter. But if you're just like, helping improve your, your essay or something, I would say it doesn't actually matter that much.
But you do recommend paying for one of them?
100%.
Why
yes.
is that?
Well, access to the higher end models does make a big difference. So while maybe like GPT 4.0 and Sonnet 3.5 are like more or less equivalent, the difference between Haiku, which is the simplest model offered by Anthropic, and Opus or Sonnet 3.5 is enormous. And you really want access to those higher end models if you want to have like really high level like outputs from these things.
Yeah. Yeah. I would posit that if you are a person who has a laptop open more than half of your day, then you can absolutely find $20 per month worth of utility from these AI products right now. And if you can't find that, and you listen to this and still don't think you could, then we probably did a bad job, because there's definitely ways that it can speed you up, elevate your thinking, save time, and otherwise. So that makes sense on paying for one and just go for it.
But what about you? I mean, you were asking me that as if you had something in mind in terms of how a layperson broadly defined as someone who doesn't work in AI, should think about the difference between these models. Do you think that they actually should go out and do research on the difference?
It's tough to say. I mean, I feel like each subsequent month, I'll read a different article that's like, ChatGPT, OpenAI has taken the lead with this latest release. And then it's like, oh, except now Claude is back in front. And it's kind of, a little bit head spinny. I would, had you not said that, I would have agreed that Claude's model seems to be the most intuitive as of a writing standpoint.
Yeah.
Like it actually, every time I read something that ChatGPT has written, I'm like, it's just like, it's got a flavor that's like artificial sweetener. But it's like ChatGPT, you just tell, and I can't articulate why.
Yeah.
But I feel like Claude gets much closer to writing what a human would do. And then I found it to be better at summarizing and providing takeaways if I provided an input document.
Right. I think that's right. And I think the good piece of news around that you may have seen, and I've certainly seen in my business, is that I would say even in the next, 6 months, we're going to see consumers probably move away from direct, sorry to my ex-boss who runs the OpenAI consumer division, but I don't think people will be using that. I think they're going to have a big drop off, because I think there's going to be an abstraction layer of companies like, again, Village Labs or Perplexity that let you just in a drop down, like click for $20 a month still, right? They're like aggregating the costs. You can say, I want to ask ChatGPT or actually I wanted you to send it to both Claude and GPT and then give me both responses side by side.
Yeah.
like we're literally rolling out a feature that does that pretty soon. And so like, why would you ever need to get a subscription if you can just do that through a third-party aggregator?
Yeah, post your job one place and it sends it to Indeed and Monster, and then
exactly
the AIs or other tools that work for you.
Right.
Okay, what is Village Labs building towards long term? I want to hear it.
You go back into 1980. A lot of businesses, real big globe-spanning businesses, were still using largely filing cabinets and secretaries to manage their information flow, right? That was best in class. Then you start to see this transition that happens remarkably fast, given the whole previous history of how people did business, to essentially having a computer in your closet, a mainframe. So you have a server room, and everyone's moving all of their paper documents into a computer. Scary big black box, literally, right? Yeah. IBM mainframe black box. And you start to see goodbye secretaries, goodbye filing cabinets. Everyone has now this machine on their desk, a desktop computer that's connected via LAN to these mainframes. Then you see the next big transition that happens even faster towards cloud computing and web applications. Yeah. If you remember, the original CEO of Salesforce with the big no software ad campaign they did, where like, why are you getting CDs delivered in your mail? We are fully web applications. Everything can live in the cloud. Everyone originally freaks out about this because, oh no, the data is no longer in my closet. It's like in this mysterious place in the cloud where anyone can read it, right? But now everyone's like, that's obvious. It's obvious that we moved to web-based applications. The problem that we're facing now, both in business but also like personal life, right, is we are inundated with an app for everything. And the data is siloed accordingly, right? Your Gmail doesn't necessarily play nice with your CRM platform. It probably has connections to it, but then you have your Slack, then you have your project management tools, then you have your code repositories if you're a software business. What we are seeing now with AI is the next transition in this broader life cycle of information storage. I think it's a misdirection to think that the most important thing that's happening in AI right now is large language models in of themselves. What we are doing at Village Labs and a couple other businesses as well are actually transitioning how your data is stored, the information that's generated by people on a day-to-day basis at your business. We are transitioning that to be available to the current and future artificial intelligence models. So the future of, and the hard part right now for businesses to really take advantage of AI is not choosing which model you're going to use. It's how the hell do I get all of the data exhaust that's going on in my business day to day into a format that I can effectively take advantage of generative artificial intelligence. And so what we do at Village is we connect to all of your SaaS applications, right? Everything that your company lives in day to day, especially for technology companies, which is where we're starting. And we make all of that data available through some very complex data pipeline and transformation work so that you can build essentially no-code AI applications on top of that data. So I can essentially ask my company, the holistic concept of my company, this cloud of information, anything that I want, and it'll answer me, almost like a hive mind of information. But we mentioned before that I think we're moving away from this like ask, like call response style interaction. What we're actually doing now is we're now trying to predict ahead of time what you want to know and then serve that to you in real time based off of what's happening across your organization. So never ever again, if you're using Village Labs or a similar, competitor of ours, will you ever have to wait for, as the data science team, you don't have to wait for the marketing team to like deign to alert you of a new marketing campaign they're about to launch that they needed like, data pipelines up and running for yesterday, right? So we're skipping all of that. Every single day you wake up in the morning and you have exactly what you need to know across your desk. And so I think, again, whether or not it's Village Labs, the future is this next step. It's the post-cloud world where everything's going to be available for artificial intelligence applications.
Yeah. And when I read your aha moment, my thought was, that's awesome. And like, holy big brother.
Yeah.
How do you mitigate that? And then also like, what's the 2034 version of this? Like, are people going to start marking like this file is not readable by AI, it's like my private notes, or like how do you navigate that?
So there's two different questions in there, and I think I'll start with the fun one, which is what's going to be in 2034. And what we're building towards, our vision at Village, is everyone needs their own model. And so you hear Apple talking about trying to do some of this stuff where they have your phone and your data so you get your own custom AI. That's crap. They don't have enough information and the incentive is not there. I believe that with Village Labs and similar tools, you, Brent, we will have all of the information about you and how you've interacted with everyone else on your day-to-day job.
If Apple has every text that I've ever sent or every iMessage and phone calls and my browsing data, how do they not have enough information to make a model?
I think they do, to be clear. I don't think the incentives are right for that to move as quickly as business-based applications. Because I think companies are highly incentivized to give every individual their own personal model that can essentially do significant portions of their job to their taste and ability.
Sure.
Whereas Apple, I'm in this business. I'm a little bit freaked out about like Apple building a model of me. But when I think about it from a business perspective, I would love to have a virtual Bradford that could respond to my emails totally in my tone with my knowledge base. In fact, an expanded version of my knowledge base. Suddenly that's really palatable because it makes my life easier, right? And I can do 10 times as much work because I have a fully capable virtual agent version of myself. So that's where we're headed. Whether it's Village Labs or not, hold on to your butt because that's what's going to happen in the next few years, maybe even a couple of years, not like well before 2034. And the reason it's not creepy, well, it might be creepy, right? I can't control if you think it's creepy, but the reason it won't be super creepy is because we will have privacy measures in place so that I'm not able to access what's in Brent's model. Or I can maybe interact with you, but there's going to be measures in place so that like I can't access your memory. The same way I can't hack your brain open and say like, what's the most, Brent's biggest fear, right? You won't be able to do that either with these models. They're going to be super, super locked down. Leaks will probably happen and there's going to be tons of news about that stuff. But people will be, again, this is why I think it's a business problem, not an Apple problem, is people are going to be more incentivized to use them because of how effective they're going to be. And they're going to overcome those concerns they have about privacy.
Got it. And so when somebody is buying now, when a company's buying now, what's the value prop for them?
Well, I also want to address your comment about Big Brother. We do take that really seriously now. And by default, we don't look at your private conversations. That'll come in the future when we start getting into the training your own model where you have a lot more control. So for now, it's if you can theoretically access it in your business already, then it goes into our models and our databases. Otherwise, we ignore it. So we're not, people are very comfortable with that level. Our value prop now is that I actually think you said the prosthesis of the mind. Was that what you called it?
Yeah, a prosthesis for thinking.
For thinking?
Yeah.
I love that. I had not heard that before. We are very much that for how you process information within your organization. So I mentioned before, there's this cloud of infinite knowledge, even in like a 20-person org, right? There's more information being generated than you can theoretically comb through. How that expresses itself now is by a significant drag on efficiency within your org. I talk to, again, 20-person companies that don't know something that's happening 2 desks over just because there's so much information to consume. We make it so that you never ever have that problem ever again because we know exactly what to serve you. And then if you want to ask it a question, we can also just provide you, we know exactly where to look, right? The machine is great, much larger than your mind is in terms of its ability to find relevant information for you. So give you an example, I never have to write a status update for my team anymore, ever. Right? It's automatically written for me. And that's something that, especially when I was working at Uber and other big companies, I would spend a day a week getting ready for the monthly business review. So no longer do I have to do that, nor does the CEO have to waste his time or her time looking through these monthly business reviews either, that are also probably super biased because the directors or VPs are incentivized to make their teams look better than they actually are. We can do that 100% automatically.
How does that animal spirits of somebody wanting, how does that come through? Somebody, they still want to make their team look good. It's a strategy function. They want to take ownership and kind of own the narrative.
Yeah.
How does that play out?
So with our tool, they technically can. So you can always go in and like edit anything coming from your team. I would say that I was really worried, transparently, that when we rolled this out, people were going to lose their minds because, they were going to think, I don't have any control over the narrative. That has actually not been what's happened. And I'm trying to figure out exactly why. But part of it is I think that we do such a good job picking up what people are doing that it helps so much in terms of time savings that people are really willing to like sacrifice a little bit of the narrative control just because it saves so much time. The other thing is that I always like to remind folks of this, that we talk all the time about not listening to the loudest person in the room when it comes to decision making. Almost impossible to actually put into practice. What we do, because we literally let your work speak for itself, right? We're like looking at the work as it's happening in real time and presenting that on your behalf. A very large percentage of these companies have people who don't like to stand up for themselves necessarily. Suddenly they look like superstars, as they should, because all of the work that they're doing is properly represented on the same playing field as everybody else. And those people love our product.
Yeah, I can see that around. It is like a more objective measure.
Yeah. But yeah.
When you think about the AI conjecture and the AI speculation that's out there and the kind of popular takes, anything that particularly resonates with you around a fear or something you're excited about? And then I'm going to ask the flip side, anything that you think, people are worried about this. I'm not. They're blowing that out of proportion.
So I still remember when the GPT-4 model came out, I got on the phone with my business partner and I was like, we need to do something. I was like, the world is ending. You think I'm joking? We had like a severe we thought about, okay, what are our business contingencies for when these models get just one or two steps more powerful? And
for Village Labs specifically?
I'm like, my kids. I'm like, what are my kids going to be doing?
Oh, sure.
And we were like very serious, like really serious conversation. That sounds kind of laughable now, but like we had a really serious conversation about, were we spending our time and our money on the right thing given what was happening in AI? So I say that because I have taken the fears of this stuff really seriously, having been in the guts of how it works. It freaked me the fuck out, frankly. But there's a couple reasons why I no longer feel that scared. Or I think we should have that fear in the back of our minds.
Can you articulate the fear a little bit more before you unpack not feeling it as much?
Yes. And I'd love your take on this too, by the way, Brent, because I think that would add to the conversation a lot. But I think that the good old-fashioned paperclip optimization problem that I'm sure most of the listeners have heard some version of is the simplest way of explaining my fear. If you have an artificial intelligence that gains, whether or not it's generally intelligent, AGI, if it gains too much power in terms of its ability to compute and impact the real world, a really small miscalculation in terms of what its objective function and what it's trying to accomplish, to give it agency, a really small miscalculation can result in horrible, horrible things. The paperclip example is if you tell an infinitely powerful machine to optimize paperclip consumption, it will eventually kill everything in the universe because it needs those resources to make more paperclips, right? So that's a super weird example, but I think it's a great one to illustrate it. And that was what we thought, is like, hey, humans are super fallible. Anyone who's ever worked in software development knows that bugs are everywhere because people's brains don't work as well as computer logic does, right? And so we make mistakes. And so obviously someone will mess up the objective function of one of these models. It will get too much power and control, which sounds crazy and insane to say, but that was the fear. And do something to fundamentally disrupt human life, right? And so does that answer the question around the fear?
Yeah, totally.
I think that why I've taken a step back from that is for two reasons. One, I legitimately think that development is moving more slowly than we actually expected it to. And then two, I understand a little bit more about how large language models and neural networks work. And I think that I don't think it's too much of a leap to say that the human brain influenced a lot of the development of neural networks, which is ultimately, for those of you who don't know, the underlying computation engine behind large language models is making connections like neurons in your brain between different concepts in what's called a vector database. And what I've realized, and I'll quote, I think Edward Gibson is a really good person to look into about this, who's an MIT linguist, who he explained it the simplest, I think, saying that if you look at the human brain and how it fires when we're talking. So right now, if you were to look at our brains, you're listening to someone, you're reading, or you're speaking, a very specific part of your brain, a very specific part of your neural network is up and running and firing. However, that is 100% not the same part of your brain that's running or firing when you are just thinking, or you are remembering, or you are doing math. And so I think it's a really big mistake to assume that the current direction of large language models is going to lead to artificial general intelligence. Now, I'm not going to say it's not going to happen anytime soon, but I think that there's a lot of really good indication, both from the human example, but also from other research that we can talk about, that explains how you actually need totally fundamentally different technological breakthroughs to solve for the memory part and for the math part. So deterministic solving of intractable problems, which we can get into, or the actual thinking and the abstract thought components of the brain. And so you need to, I would call, let's say that there are 3 big breakthroughs that need to happen for us to even get close to AGI. So we should still be afraid of it because it might be something that's super dangerous because of the paperclip problem. But it's not like around the next corner, right? You need to solve like each of those 3 new tech problems, I believe, to actually make it happen. But what are I would love to hear your thoughts on this and see if you agree.
Yeah. I think my fears and excitements are a little bit more conceptual. Conceptually, I feel promise because in theory, more things should come into the realm of being possible. But I worry that if we just use this technology to kind of spin the capitalist hamster wheel faster and we don't pass the gains onto ourselves in terms of increased quality of living, then we might be faster off, but we might not be better off. And so I want, the happiness index to move as a result of you knowing more things at your company, so therefore you have more time back, so you might be able to spend it with your kids or exercising or in nature or contemplating the universe or playing an instrument or any of these things that we know tie into living a good life, but we might not do because we're going faster and faster to chase a dollar and to chase professional accomplishment. So that would be my hope, is that we might be able to figure out how to use AI to move us in that direction. And specifically, I was thinking this weekend, I wear this Whoop strap, right? Like it is at this point, I basically know this tells you your calories burned, your strain on a given day, and then it gives you a recovery score each morning, which is a composite of your heart rate variability, your resting heart rate, how well you slept the night before. Lord knows if you had any alcohol, it will tank your Whoop score.
Yeah.
I know basically what it's going to say each day, but it's a helpful behavioral nudge for me to get my recovery score. I want it to be higher. And so there are plenty of things like a Whoop strap in the market that will nudge you towards more health, or that the incentives will nudge you towards making more money or being more efficient.
Yeah.
I was thinking that there are very few things that will nudge you towards being a more loving person, a more compassionate person, a more present and available person for your family. And I was thinking, the Whoop is a little bit of a proxy for that. If I'm strung out and I'm stressed, I'm likely to have worse scores. So sure, if I get a better rest, if I'm in a more even keel headspace, that's likely to lead to a better place. But still, it's not, it doesn't care whether I was emotionally available for my daughter that day. And there's a world in which the AI as a consistent thought partner and co-pilot to us in life can be a nudge towards an objective function that is good. Like to your point on like, what are you optimizing for? AI should help you get there. If I tell it, I want to care about people around me more. I want to check in on my mom because I want to be closer to my family. Like I want to enjoy life and these trips around the sun, and that it can behaviorally nudge me towards that. Like that might lead to a great place. But I think what that requires us doing is wanting something good and worth wanting.
Yeah.
And I don't know that incentive will win compared to arbitrage for our attention, more apps that want us to be fearful of one another, thinking we're at war, enraged at what we read in the news, thinking that there is no path forward and more tomorrow, fear and distrust and all of that. So there's my long answer.
I love, no, it's great. I love that I jump straight to the apocalypse and you're like, work-life balance. I like your answer.
One is a step to the other.
Yeah, true. But I think, look, you bring up some incredible points, and I think they're way more practical. And I think my thoughts on your answer are, I agree with everything that you say. I actually think that you're describing a possible negative outcome and a possible positive outcome that are actually not AI driven. Like we probably have more fundamental issues or opportunities that we need to solve within our, late Western capitalism and democracies, at least in the Western world, for us to get there. Which that's a topic for another podcast.
We're going to definitely do that topic. And then AI as a tool that either accelerates that or in either direction or one or the other. Well, then let me ask a couple kind of specific questions there. Like, do you think our kids, we have kids similar age, are they going to have AI friends? Like, will their best friends be AI? Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think they will have AI friends. I think it's kind of inevitable. My big question is, will they have AI friends that are like one-on-one friendable versus like, someone else in your text thread that plays a certain part within your group. Does that make sense? Like, I think that, for example, and I'm sure I'll look back on this in 10 years and be like, wow, we totally missed the point of like
the obvious thing that was just sitting there that we didn't know.
This is probably a very narrow view, but similar to how I think about using AI in work, right now I think of it as a team member or an extension of the self. And I could totally see it starting to play a almost semi-conscious role. Meta has done a really good job adding into WhatsApp, like different personalities you can talk to that are like really pretty compelling, frankly. But like, would I just talk to that person versus would it be useful to have like, I have an AI analyst that sits in my fantasy football chat group, right? That like is a friend, quote unquote, and they'll probably develop a lot. So I don't know. It's hard to say. And my guess is that, the more important question that I think you'll probably get to if I know you is, does it matter, and how does that change their development and how they become happy and effective adults? And I think like the reason I would be afraid of allowing that in my household is the same reason I'm afraid of allowing social media in my household. Not because there's some evil, dark Mark Zuckerberg somewhere. I think he's a great guy, actually. But I think that the algorithms that they develop are incentivized by the open market to do stuff that is not actually good for my kids, right? It's pure incentives. There's no evil dictator behind all this stuff, which people think sometimes. It's just simple economics. And I would be worried letting my kids befriend an AI for the same reason, because whoever's developing that probably has incentives that are beyond just making my kid happy and healthy.
Yeah, if you're going to pay money for the AI to be friends with your daughter, and your daughter wanting it is predicated on how much time she wants to spend with it, then naturally, to some level, it wants to addict her.
100%. 100%.
And so therein lies the rub.
You nailed exactly.
And I mean, the thing that, again, there's shades of gray and how this is going to play out. I mean, the thing that I could get excited about is like an empathetic sounding board that would help process things that are going on out in the world for her. But on the flip side, at the end of the day, it's like, all right, well, what values was that encoded with? What's it trading on? And so maybe, that becomes what somebody is marketing, or their go-to-market strategy is predicated on the values that are embedded in the friendship model.
Right. Which goes back to why I think it's really important for us to have our own personalized model. Well, I'm thinking about this live. I haven't actually considered this before, so good questions. I think there could be a really good argument that whether it's Apple or Village Labs from a business perspective, developing a model for Brent, like you, right, that perhaps that's your daughter's friend, where there's a way that you can give her access to asking something based off of your values as her parent.
Oh, wow.
That is private to you. So there's almost like a mode you can give to your family members that's like, talk to dad, Now there's ways that can go dark as well, right? Sure. But I think that that's one way maybe we could get around some of these concerns around incentives.
Yeah. Ancestor mode. That's interesting to consider.
Yeah, I mean, 300 years, maybe someone can still talk to us after our death.
Yeah. And I mean, again, like the optimistic side in me is, that old adage that you are the sum total of the 5 people that you spend the most time with.
Yeah.
Like if one of those becomes an AI because you have a C-3PO who's your co-pilot at work, who you're interfacing about what to make dinner with and where your plans should be that weekend, and they are the model trained on you, like that will be one of your 5 people. And so again, if you can figure out how to tell that what you want to become and what you want to be formed into, as long as you want something that's worthwhile and moving you in the right direction towards the person you want to become, like in theory, that could be a really, really helpful thing.
Yeah. I agree. Ironically, I think one of the things that I have trouble getting over on this, and I'd love your thoughts on this as well, is not whether or not it's a benefit. It's this concept of it feels somehow wrong to the human soul inside of me to interact with something that's not conscious, or it feels rightly or wrongly like I'm talking to a machine that has a pre-scripted response, even if I know that may or may not be like technically accurate. Where it suddenly gets easier for me to accept the idea of AI friends is or confidants, or one of those 5 people that make up who you are, is if we cross some sort of arbitrary barrier towards general intelligence. Suddenly, I think there may be civil rights movement around AGI if and when that becomes something that we interact with. And then the big question becomes not if you should have friends that are artificial intelligences, it's how do we define AGI, and then when do we treat those people like people? Yeah. And that's another big scary conversation probably for another time as well.
Yeah, when it like starts to look and sound like a human. I mean, to your point on what does it mean to have an ongoing dialogue with something that isn't real, but kind of feels like it is real at the same time. I was thinking in preparation for this podcast, like about that concept of an ongoing dialogue with a co-pilot that might be one of your 5 closest people. And at some point, if you're doing that to try to move closer towards a certain value system, to me, that starts to look like a prayerful life. When you think about one of the things the Bible says, pray without ceasing, and if you're praying throughout the day, you're basically trying to bring yourself into right relationship with a force greater than yourself by bringing what's happening in your world, processing it through that, asking for guidance and inspiration, rerouting you to some set of principles. And if you start to do that with an AI co-pilot, whether you're speaking to that or writing to it, or in the future thinking something what appears, like it doesn't feel that far off, like it starts to look like the same habits for me. And that's when I wind up with my brain in a little bit of a blender or pretzel when I'm like, part of that could be very good if it moves us towards being more loving, more compassionate, more understanding, more patient, use any of the good words. And then part of me just thinks it is taking something that, we have felt since way back in human history about the needs to situate us within a context of a higher power and forces that we don't understand, and kind of like makes the mystery in the palm of your hand. Like, it's strange.
Well, I mean, the question I have, and maybe this is too specific, but the question I would have back for you as well, if you're praying, and transparently, I'm not a believer, but I have been in my past. So who knows? Maybe I'll return to God one day. But the question I have is, when I was going through my time where I spent time praying, and it was not another interactive entity. That entity was made up of my understanding of the Bible, for example, and auxiliary texts from people who were really smart, who had written a lot about it, right, and who had thought about a lot of the concepts. And so, in that case, am I understanding you correctly that you think of a prayerful, because God's presumably not talking to you? I mean, maybe that's what you believe, but I think most people really don't believe you're like in direct communication with God. And so, therefore, a prayerful life is about contemplation in your relationship with a set of texts and your interpretation of those. Are you saying that the AI version of that is like an interactive version of those texts? So there's some body of like goals and like ideals that you're interacting with? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, the question does make sense. And I actually think it's a very important distinction, because if you're living a prayerful life, you're right. God is not talking to you. But if you're building the contemplative habit, you are trying to get to a wavelength where you feel like you can trust the signal. And God may not be talking to you in terms of, this is what you should go do, but you might have an intuition or a subtle gut feeling or a sign that you feel like, okay, based on what I'm asking for and seeking and knocking, this is what I notice, and I can trust that it's in accordance with a higher will or a higher energy or a true purpose, whatever words you want to put around that feeling. It is a little bit of a one-way street that then requires your contemplation and your interpretation, and then to act on that and your desire. If you start to get into the motion of asking, and then not only is somebody answering, but they're answering rapidly and it's never stopping, and they'll give you another take on that, it becomes much more participatory and back and forth, where, I can see that largely maybe even being a substitute for the prayer motion for the type of person who might be inclined to pray, because all of a sudden you get a response rapidly every time.
I guess, things. But I guess the question would be based on what, which goes back to your point earlier, which is, okay, well, who's training the model? Is it you? Is it a company? Is it the church? So that's where I think things get pretty interesting. But I think what you're saying makes sense and is like a very interesting application for that, and something that I think, as someone who doesn't believe in God, frankly, I do find something very much missing from my life as someone who did have the church in my life in two ways. One, and I think there's ways to replace this, right? Which is what I'm going to get to. I find that the contemplative nature of prayer, an important thing, like meditation, essentially, to asking yourself how to act and how to be a good contributor to society. And then similarly, the community side of things as well, but that's out of the AI scope. I would say that it is really interesting to think about, could AI provide, in the way that you're describing, a method for, frankly, non-believers to get some of the same benefit and maybe become better people in certain ways that they couldn't otherwise get because they don't have prayer or they don't participate in that sort of activity. I don't know. It's something interesting. I don't know what you think about that as a believer, but I find it to be something that is missing, I think, from a lot of folks' life. Yeah,
I'm sure some people would give you very different answers based on their specific faith doctrine that they ascribe to. If there's a tool that someone is using to become more peaceful and compassionate and loving, and they're doing it in a very secular context, but they have an earnest desire to live that way because they think it's better, but they are not putting it at all through the filter of the teachings of Jesus Christ, does that get to the same ends, or do you have to call it a certain way? I tend to be a little bit of the bigger tent variety, that the kind of universal Christ energy is working in us and through us and on us, whether we want it to or not. But I know some people who would take a very different answer.
Yeah, I can imagine.
To that.
Yeah. Well, it's probably a spectrum, right? Where, whether whatever you believe, I think. Well, maybe to your point, that's not true, but I would hope to think that everyone wants people to be better, more peaceful, more thoughtful, better contributors to society.
You did start to touch on the civil rights issues. You can't call it human rights because it's AI rights.
That's right, yeah.
That we might ascribe to the models in the future. We also talked about some of what goes into building the AIs now as problematic and a little bit below the surface, so not on people's radar. What have you learned about that in your journey?
Yeah, great question. I think, so we've gotten, as I mentioned, deep into the guts of how a lot of these models are built. As I said earlier, I'm not an AI scientist, but I have learned a lot about how they work. And one thing that shocked me was just how human labor reliant the models are. And so this is changing a little bit, but I think something that a lot of people don't know is that there are literally tens of millions of humans, largely in emerging markets. So sub-Saharan Africa is a really big one, certain parts of Southeast Asia that have done a large amount of manual labor to make these models work. I think it's really tempting to look at the OpenAI models or the Anthropic models and think to yourself, okay, big tech, West Coast US or Western Europe, they clearly have a bunch of smart data scientists or academics that built these models. That's not how it works. Almost any accurate answer that you're going to get back from one of these models first went through a large number of human beings asking the exact same thing. These models are largely getting smarter. I think a dirty little secret, not because the core tech is getting better. It is certainly getting better, but it's actually just because there's a larger body of data being fed into these models. And so I was introduced to some really concerning businesses that had sort of a churn and burn brand strategy. They would drop into a place like Kenya and say, we'll pay you $2 an hour if you go and draw orange circles around stop signs every single hour of the day for 150 days straight. And oftentimes they would actually not even end up paying these people. So this is almost borderline slave labor in some cases. And I know I'm sure folks would argue against me on this, but I think they would be super biased if they did so, because the amount of labor abuse that I've seen training some of these models is pretty shocking. And I'm not going to name specific names here, but you can go out and Google for yourself. There's some New York Times articles and Washington Post articles about some of the labor abuses that have gone into training these models. And so you and I were chatting before we started recording, and you asked me, what the key takeaway is for this. And I think there's two. One is people should just be aware of the human cost that goes into AI. And that's going to continue to be a thing, right? We may have solved the AI being able to recognize a stop sign problem, but we haven't solved the niche real estate market training on, a neighborhood in Atlanta and how to best price a house, right? So you need a specialist or human labor to go in and figure out how to do that sort of thing. So that's going to continue to be a problem, is how human labor is going into building these models. And so I think people should just be aware of that and not think it's some voodoo Silicon Valley magic. The other thing is, I think from a trends perspective, you're going to probably see some version of, as I think you said, fair trade AI models out there. Meta is already, and Google, I think, have already actually put out some stuff from this. And so, rightly, I think we will see some version of, free range chicken in the AI models, not to use that to belittle in any way the actual human suffering that went into some of these things. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's going to be a wild time. All that to say, there is a big movement towards computer-generated training data, and you're going to hear a lot about that, and that is taking away some of the human labor cost. But look, it's only going to take away a portion of it, and human work is going to go into a lot of this stuff. And I think we should keep that in mind as we think about the future of how we interact with AI. And like you said, if we're using AI to make our lives better, remember that it was done on the backs of like a lot of people who have already done tasks repetitively a lot.
Yeah, and I think it would be, it's easy to gloss over, and there's probably a reason why more people, myself included, didn't know that. We don't like thinking about stuff like that. We like the Nikes. We don't like thinking about the labor that went into the Nikes. But it does feel like we're missing something if we don't consider the full cost of not only, we're talking about the output and the outcomes of these models, but also like what went into creating this thing as well.
One question I ask everyone to think about on this topic is, well, ironically and perhaps wrongly, we may have already moved past the era when you can truly take advantage of low skill labor on AI training, because we've already trained it on a lot of the basic tasks that the human brain can do just because it's the human brain, right? And so we're moving on to specialist labor. And so you may be approached, I have been approached already, by companies that need you to train an artificial intelligence model on a specific task. And so it's an interesting thought experiment to think about, how do you react to that? You may take the job because they pay well per hour.
Yeah, can you say more about what that looked like?
So let's say I'll give a really simple example of...
What happened to you?
Well, so product management. So I'm a product manager by trade, right? And so I, probably just because I was like involved and knew people at these companies, I was asked to do certain tasks associated with looking at product requirement documents. So like, which is something you write up, for those of you who don't know, to hand off to an engineering and design team so that they build the right thing, basically, right? And so there's a bunch of different ways you can write product requirements in order to make sure that your engineering teams build the right things, that, they remember to put the back button in a certain place, that, which page it goes back to, all the small things you take for granted when you're using a web or a mobile application, you have to think about and write all the edge cases for, essentially, when you're building an application. And so it's not that complicated, right? What I do is not rocket science, but it is something that if you've seen a lot of them, you know how to judge whether one is a good requirement document or not. And so I'm offered a pretty high hourly rate by some random company to go in and like say over and over again with two different documents next to each other, which one is better. And so over and over and over again, each for many, many hours, judging back and forth which requirement it is. And the way that works is they've already pre-trained these models on some stuff, and then they give it what's called a different temperature. Well, they basically allow for a large amount of variance in the model's output. And so they serve you two different versions of the output over and over and over again. It's called RLHF.
It's like you're getting your eyes done only for...
reinforcement learning through human feedback. And then also base model training. Details don't matter too much, but the point is that over hours and hours and hours, using my specialist training in something, I can improve the output in this narrow niche, skill set for a base model. And so, doing that is interesting because I'm like, well, am I taking myself out of a job, or am I making my job easier? Right? It could go either way, because now the model can do a better job writing product requirements. And
classic prisoner's dilemma. If you don't for that nice salary, someone else will. So
that's what I was going to get to. Is the prisoner's dilemma? Is well, you need to we might be too late, but if you ever wanted to unionize to make sure that the models can't do your job, you better do it like tomorrow, because right now I guarantee you, in every niche part of the world, of the economy, someone is out there trying to train a model to do your job.
If you need to write up your union docs, use Claude, because it's a better writer than
much
Chatgpt.
Better. They're already trained by union members on writing up articles of incorporation. So yeah, it's something to think about. It's like how much, whether or not you think it can take your job, how much are you willing to contribute to the long-term success of a tech company's ability to do part of your job?
Yeah, totally.
So,
thanks for this. I'm going to ask a few lightning round questions before we get out of here. And I also trust that this will not be the last time, certainly on this podcast. Hopefully we'll have you back to relook at some of these predictions in a few years. But like evergreen topic, like where are we trying to go and why? What are we worried about on the path to getting there? How does it help us actually live better, work being a core part of life, not just have work take over life, but be a tool and asset for us in the context of a full life. So thanks for spending some time today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been great. Hopefully you don't have to throw it all out because of all the crazy shit I've been saying.
No, we're right in there. But there's still time. Your favorite Atlanta meal?
I would say this changes day to day, but I would say Fred's Meat and Breads. I think it's the Thai spicy steak and cheese that they have is like melts in your mouth. Can't beat it. Makes me want to die after I ate it, but it's incredible and worth it anyway.
Short-term gratification.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I wanted to ask this earlier, but I saved it. What do you think happens to us when we die?
Nothing, unfortunately. I think it just all goes away and the atoms disperse.
Deep sleep or just truly nothing?
I think just absolute cease to exist. But I do like to think that your atoms get spread out a good bit. So, you'll live on at least physiologically in other people indefinitely.
Going from, you said you believed in a past phase of your life to now believing that it all ends. How does that impact how you live your day to day and how you think about kind of horizons of life going forward? That's not a lightning round question.
No, surprisingly not a lot. And I think that as someone, just to be clear, I think for anyone that has spent a lot of time studying any religion, especially at least the ones I'm most familiar with, which are Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, which is what I studied in college, and also I personally was a member of the Christian faith for a long time. It's really hard not to have a great deal of respect for the ideas there, and I certainly consider the teachings of Jesus, for example, as like incredibly good distillations of what makes people good and effective and part of a healthy society. So I very much still believe that. And there are other reasons we won't get into now as to why I don't believe, but they're not necessarily related to the fundamental ideas on how to be a good human. So I think I still believe that those are the right ways of living life largely with some tweaks.
Okay. Thank you.
Do religion next time.
I will. Book recommendations, a book that if you could tell one folks listening to this, one book to read, what would you say and why?
So I might have said this even if the topic wasn't AI, because I just finished the Martha Wells Murderbot series. I have not read something. I mean, I cried like 3 times, and I'm a crier though. I cry for movies and books all the time, but it's about an artificial intelligence. Again, I was going to say this actually before. I would have said this without this being the topic. It's about a robot that is sentient, and the robot is in a lot of ways more human and empathetic than a lot of the humans in the story. And it's very much used as like a self-reflection, like what it means to be like compassionate and like a good person through the eyes of a robot that's not human. And it's also hilarious. It's like a good comedy. So highly recommend reading that to anybody. You'll laugh.
What's it called?
Cry.
What's the first one called?
The first book? I think the first one's a novella or a short story, but search for Network Effect, I think is one I would recommend starting. Martha Wells, absolutely hilarious and incredible.
Cool. The last one is, what is a habit that you see us embracing in modern culture that you think doesn't serve us, and what would you replace it with?
So, I mentioned this already. I don't think anyone should ever go on Instagram or TikTok. I think it's fundamentally broken, and it's a asymmetric information warfare in your brain. And I know a lot of people say that.
What do you think's happening to your brain by participating in this warfare?
So I believe that the best and I'm stealing this from people who are smarter than me in neuroscience, but my understanding and my personal experience is that it is giving you some of the same bad mental, what is the word I'm looking for? It's pushing you into some of the same mental models, the different types of drugs that impact dopamine levels in your brain push you into. So you're getting into like an addiction cycle that's very short-term outcome based. And I think that that's the same way that you probably shouldn't smoke cigarettes because it does this to your brain, or you shouldn't do, even worse, like meth, right? Because it does this to your brain. It builds in the wrong sort of incentives for how you should behave on a day-to-day basis. And I think the thing I would layer on top of that meth doesn't even do is that it's super short-term sensational focused, right? And so it's actually changing how you should think in a negative way. And the way I would replace it is, I studied English Lit in college. I think everyone should spend more time reading books. So
it's going to be such a popular take.
Yeah, I mean, look, I know it's not original, but like having worked in and seen my wife work in these companies, I know how they work. And again, it's not evil people, but the way that the algorithms are developed and the way that the A/B testing works is evil, I think. And it's like it's going to mess people's brains up and society up at large.
Yeah. So if you're not following Macon Atlanta on Instagram, get on there now. Check us out. Short-term reels, not designed to addict anybody. I'm not sure we're good enough to be addictive.
Hey, I use it. I pay money to social media to advertise my product. So it's, you have to live in the real world too.
Yeah,
so.
damn if you do, damn if you don't. All right. Thank you, Bradford.
That's our show for today. Probably could have gone forever about the practical implications of AI, the use cases today, what it means long-term for us spiritually, professionally, as a people, what we should be excited about and worried about. It certainly is a meaty topic when you dig in. We'll continue to focus on how can these be tools for us in the here and now, and not just conceptual things that we are worried about societally in the future. If you got questions about how to use some of these tools, anything you heard today, please hit me up. And otherwise, if you have ideas, always open to those. Thank you very much.